Yeah, it just said going away on the 1st of August, and then from that point forward, you would use. I didn't read that far. I was in a hurry to press the
Oh
button.
no, damn! I love Google Hangouts. That sucks. I know it's like old school though.
Well, then you've initiated me at the last conceivable moment. It's fantastic.
Right.
Is it possible to incorporate stream elements, screen share, cameraman? How does this work? Show or hide participants. As guests join, no. Broadcast the large video, no. New guests my feed, no.
Joey, can you shut this door, please? Can you shut the door in here?
I can't believe you have a handyman to do your bidding at every moment.
Right. He often calls himself my assistant despite being my fiance.
Oh, I didn't know. Congratulations. Do y'all have a date set?
No, we've been engaged for a year, and I believe in long engagements.
I believe in ending marriage. I'm sure we could have a discussion on that at some point or another. Another
video.
You're a year older than me, right? You're 1993.
Yeah, I'm 25.
Okay, shit. I always assume that conservatives are older than they are. I'm sure you can understand the association.
Well, you know what? I've actually taken I go back and forth between even calling myself conservative because I feel like sometimes that denotes social views. And for me, I'm actually pretty socially liberal. So I kind of just steer with the word Republican or broader terms like right wing. I don't know. I go back and forth though.
Gotcha. I'm trying to figure out how to make it display you more often on stream. Wait, so if I click that, does that go to? Oh, I'm live under. Okay, beautiful. There we go. Okay, I think I get it now. I think I have mastered this program.
Okay. It should just switch back and forth based on who's talking.
Hell yeah! I love not having to do as much. And let me just a second. Fuck me. Okay, nice. All right, I think we're set up. Blaire, okay. Blaire White, my beautiful, my comrade. How the hell are you doing this fine day?
I'm good, but I'm jet lagged because I just got in from Chicago last night, and it was a long flight, very turbulent, which I hate flying, so turbulence is my enemy. But I did a really cool speaking event in Chicago, so I'm kind of hyped from that still. So I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderfully. I'm tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I've got a flight out to Los Angeles to go to Anime Expo. So we're packing all our shit for that, and we're moving just a few weeks after we come back. So we're actually going to be pretty busy this upcoming week. It is hell, but for a brief, beautiful few days, you and I are going to be within a few dozen miles of each other, which I don't know, camaraderie in some distant respect.
In person.
Yeah, well, hey, are you coming to Anime Expo?
No.
Come on. They've got nice
art. I'm not really into anime.
I get it. There's some good shit out there. I was gonna ask you this on stream, but you already said you've never watched a ContraPoints video, so I can't even talk to you about those.
I haven't. I've gotten a couple messages saying that the last one was interesting, so I think I am gonna watch it. But it's funny, like we talked about it earlier, but despite doing YouTube for my full-time job, I actually don't watch a ton of YouTube. I watch my close friends, but even then I don't watch some of their stuff either. So
yeah, I've lost a lot of time to enjoy YouTube since I started doing it as well. I imagine you're busier than me, bigger public figure, obviously, but I haven't even watched the most recent philosophy tube video. Before you got in like the big time, what kind of shit did you watch? Was it mostly like fun stuff, or were you big in the political sphere on YouTube even before you became a public figure?
Oh my God, I loved YouTube, watching it a lot more before I started making videos. I grew up watching, and it's funny because I'm very close friends with her now, but I grew up watching a lot of atheism videos. So I was very into Jacqueline Glenn, very close friend of mine now. I love her. I used to watch Amazing Atheist and sort of that sphere, Mr. Repsion, when he did atheism topics. And then that whole genre sort of evolved into being social commentary and then political. So it was right around the time that it evolved into social commentary that I kind of threw my hat in the ring. And luckily it's worked out and it's been pretty successful for me. So
nice. You never even thought to check out back in 2013, 2014, Vosh. Honestly, what's wrong with you? What about supporting the smaller man? Come on.
I'm sorry.
I'm delighted to be speaking to you. Obviously, in a political sense, I think we disagree nearly as much as I shouldn't say as much as human beings can, because I talk with Nazis pretty often, and they're pretty far off.
Well,
But
thank you for not thinking I'm a Nazi.
no, that I'm not that. I'm often accused of being that hyperbolic, but I'm happy to say that at this moment, I am not. I have not fallen down the well quite that hard. Though I do remember you making some edgy tweets to or at or about Richard Spencer back in 2017 or something. But it'd be wildly uncharitable to interpret that as like
Yeah,
he
I don't
was sincere.
know. I don't even remember, to be honest. I know that he's like a tranny chaser apparently, and he sent me some weird DMs about like anime and traps or something. I don't even know what that human being.
Wait. Richard Spencer did that?
Oh my God, are we spilling tea in this one?
I know. I mean, it's Richard
So, okay.
Spencer. Not much blowback from fucking shitting on him. Please tell me
Yeah.
if you have
So
any dirt.
so Richard Spencer is an incredibly reprehensible human being, disgusting human being. I do not agree with his ideology, even
Oh
1%.
no.
But I do vaguely remember some kind of weird DM about like traps and like I guess like you know more about the anime world than me, some kind of like transgender anime or something. I don't know. I think I think one of us has walked each other. I don't even think I could see him now, but I don't know.
I cannot tell you how delighted I am by this information. God
You don't
damn.
know how much tea I could spill if you just but
No,
you know.
I don't doubt it. I mean, I learned shit. The only person who's even not far left who I'm involved with is Shoe on Head, and I've learned plenty from her. So that, that's the extent of my outreach. Fuck me. There's a really weird intersection in like fascist circles between an outright disgust at trans people, like genuine hatred, like they're all degenerate pieces of shit who must be killed, and at the same time a worship of certain like elements of anime culture sexuality that tends to include like trans girls and what get called like trapped or whatever. And it's a really weird, I guess, hypocrisy that
Well,
somebody should make a movie about.
yeah, I mean, what's funny is like there's always the classic story of like maybe the anti-gay senator or public official who has a career of voting against, pro-gay legislation, and then you catch them in a bathroom sucking dick. It's like maybe it's the same thing for trans and super, super far right people. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, I'm of the opinion that gender as a concept is a spook. That without society, most people would be some kind of pansexual, and that really gendered preferences are just a way of aligning with societal expectations of how people of given genders are supposed to express their sexual preferences. So I very much subscribe to your interpretation. I didn't know you had come over so far in gender abolitionism, Blaire.
So far, in what way?
I'm mostly teasing, but with the
Okay.
with the recognition that people often through societal pressures neglect the more expressive or less homogenous tendencies of their sexual
Oh,
interest.
no, I just meant that oftentimes if you go really, really hard against someone, there sometimes are other feelings you're internally battling with. Like, you don't know how many, so growing up in school, I was bullied very heavily for being very feminine. Like, I transitioned at 20, but everyone clocked me when I was like 5 and on. And so I got bullied really heavily by all the guys in school. I went to a really rural school in which people didn't really see people like me very often. But as I transitioned and became more of a woman, I guess, they all kind of hit me up and wanted my attention now. So, sometimes you go really hard against something because it's kind of what you're into secretly. That's kind of what I mean.
That's how it be on this bitch of an earth. You know, the real woman was inside of you all along. So their heel turn, we'll work on that. Okay, so we probably disagree on goddamn near anything, everything, and that's cool. That's life.
Love
Um,
it.
but there are because I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure I'm an anarchist, full violent revolution, proletariat seizing the means of production, abolition of gender. Whatever you heard, it's probably true. So I think discussing or parsing out political differences would be um, futile. But there is one thing I really want to talk to you about, or I guess like a branching path we could explore. Do you think that right now in America, LGBT people or queer and gender non-conform, whatever the branches, do you think that they've more or less achieved parity, or do you think that there's still like legitimate social oppression that takes place that needs to be dealt with?
I think there's definitely legitimate issues that the community faces. I mean, for some reason, I think that that might be a misconception of sort of my thoughts on LGBT is that I think like we live in this perfect paradise in America in which there are no problems. And it's really not true. I did a video recently where I spoke about how my entire father's side of my family has disowned me for being trans. So who would I be to say that like everything's fine? Like I know there's a lot of issues people face, a lot of issues trans people face. Um, but I also think that it's the best place on earth to be an LGBT person, America, right now.
Probably America, or maybe like some European country has a comparable, yeah, comparable level of. No, I agree. There probably are other places on Earth with a great deal farther to go. We recently,
Not even probably, right? Because as a trans woman, there are most, if not all, Muslim majority countries in which I can't even legally travel to. So, you know, whenever my friends and family are talking about group vacations, we have to Google if it's even legal to be me there. So, yeah.
no, undoubtedly. I think if I remember correctly, Iran actually has comparatively progressive policies on trans people, but horrid policies on gay people. I don't know if it's some specific cultural intersection of how they think gender and sexuality works, or.
Well, people say that, but what's interesting is that transition is often used to cure the gay.
Right,
And
right. That's generally, yeah,
so
exactly.
transition is often seen as this thing. It's like, okay, you can't be a guy who likes guys, so we need you to be a woman so that you blend in more with society. So I have a hard time saying that they're more progressive on trans issues when it's kind of used as a cure for gay people. It's like a mixed bag, you know. It's really messed up over there.
No, I mean, I completely agree. I would never sit here and defend the treatment of gender and sexual minorities in other parts of the world, unless we're talking
Mhm.
like, I don't know, fucking Sweden or something. But even they've got their problems, sex work, and anyway, anyway, we recently, normally we just watch YouTube videos on my channel, and I scream very loud. It's very
Mhm.
impressive, my vocal capacity. I just belt it out, you know. And the first video of yours we watched, I think, was your debate with Ben Shapiro, which we tepidly took your side on because, as much as we may disagree with you, Ben Shapiro is a monster. So it was a pretty easy choice. And
Well,
um, hmm?
what's interesting, right, is that I think sometimes it's hard for me as a YouTuber and as you know, in my career, in my field of work, to really get a grasp on how people view me. But one thing that I think a lot of people who aren't my fans view me as is someone who like does not ever want to defend trans people, like a traitor to trans people. But I would pose the question to all of them, are there any other trans people that have gotten in a room and effectively argued that trans people should be called by their preferred pronouns with Ben Shapiro? No. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like I don't ever get credit for that. Like that was a real thing that happened. I really sat and talked to Ben Shapiro about how he needs to, you know, not be addicted to trans people, but no one ever talks about it, you know?
the I think well, I mean, I know I will give you credit for that. I think the problem people have, and it's the same problem that I have, and I think I can voice those concerns sort of through my beautiful muscular throat, is that throughout his perspectives vary. Throughout history, there has been a pattern of the slow accumulation of social capital by minority groups, whether they be blacks back in the 1800s till today, the gay folk, lesbians, what have you, trans people. And very often along the way, there's a question as to how much you should capitulate to the system to appear presentable. This is something that happened back at Stonewall. The riots took place, national attention was given to gay, lesbian, and trans people. The gay and lesbian people looked at one another and said, well, shit, like, we're not going to get liberated if we're with these fucking weirdos, and toss the trans people under the bus. And that's kind of been the history of like progressive politics. And a lot of people, I guess myself included, think that you have, admittedly, pretty staunchly defended a margin of LGBT people, which is straight, passing trans women. But in the process, you have thrown everybody else, non-passing, non-straight, and non-binary, under the bus. And in that respect, you have led ultimately to far more harm than whatever good you have done for the subsection you represent, admittedly, faithfully.
I don't think that at all, actually. So if you look at the comments on a lot of my videos, every day I'm inundated with comments from people, and these are comments I get in real life as well because I travel the country speaking to people, of people saying, "I didn't understand trans people until I watched your videos. I didn't." The biggest misconception of people on the right who do not like trans people or misunderstand trans people is that it's a political thing. People think that being trans is political. They have no understanding that it's actually a medical issue. It's a neurological issue. And for me, I think that I've helped people understand that. The other day, I did a speaking event in Chicago, and a woman came up to me, and she was a mother of a trans kid. And she spoke to me and she said, and she didn't expect me to be there. She came there to see one of the other speakers that was there with me, who is a gay man named Brandon Strock. And she had really negative, horrid, quite frankly, views on trans people. And she came up to me and she said, "My daughter came out as trans. I didn't understand it. I thought it was a political thing. And we really argued about it. And I've thought about putting them out of the house. And through watching you speak today, I realized that it's not that." So I think I've actually done a lot of good for trans people. I think that oftentimes the way that I go about my, I don't know if activism is the right word, or me
Advocacy?
striving for further acceptance of trans people, I think it's different in the way a lot of other trans people do it. But I know for a fact I'm changing hearts and minds because I see it face to face. I see it in comments. And then what you said earlier about sort of capitulating or sort of aligning yourself, I think you're trying to infer with like the oppressors or like the Republicans or conservatives, the right wing.
Yeah, definitely.
For me, I often see these conversations of representation of trans people in the media, in video games, in movies, TV, all of that. And I think that that's actually important. I think that if I would have grown up seeing trans people in movies or in video games, it probably would have helped me understand myself at a younger age. There's like crazy sirens going on right now. It's
Yeah,
LA.
no worries. I'll assume they're not coming for you.
Yeah. But I think what people don't often value or understand is the value of representation of trans people on the right wing side in the Republican circles. And I think the debate with Ben Shapiro is a good example of that. There hasn't been any trans people that have effectively made the case for trans people to Ben Shapiro. The only other person that I think ever got in a room with him was, I think her name was Zoe Tur, and it ended with Zoe saying she was going to beat him up, and it was just this huge joke. I mean, trans people look awful, and you know,
To be
even
fair, I might do the same if in a room with Ben Shapiro.
and that's fine. But objectively, that conversation did absolutely nothing to further the cause of trans people or people understanding trans people. It actually did the opposite. It
No,
was
no, no. I agree. I saw the memes afterwards with her hand on Ben Shapiro's show, and I know I dealt with the fallout from that because every time now I talk about trans issues, there's, statistically speaking, there's a chance somebody brings that up with me. So I would never deny your livid experience. You probably have exposed literally hundreds of thousands of people who would otherwise be entirely unfamiliar with the existence and legitimacy of trans people, to you and subsequently to the existence and legitimacy of trans people. And that's good. I want to bring you farther, if I may. You have in the past, I guess I can get these out of the way. I remember that in the past, you've made a comment, something along the lines of, and you're free to walk back in this, or maybe your opinions changed since then, I don't know, that lesbian trans women are just like confused men. Do you believe that to be the case?
I don't think I've ever said that.
You don't think so? So that was false on my part? If that's the case, then that's my bad.
I really don't think I've ever said that. I think that in the past, I've probably had a hard time understanding that, but I don't have a hard time understanding it today. I remember in the past, probably, if you would have caught me in 2016, I think I had a lot more rigid views on what trans is because I was struggling with myself a lot. And that was before I surgically transitioned myself. But I definitely never called trans lesbians confused men. That
Gotcha. I
I'm
mean,
saying.
right. I mean, if we agree that's a dumb statement now, then whether or not you did is largely irrelevant, I think.
Yeah, I really didn't
But
have.
the principal thing I want to get at here, you earlier said something I disagree with. You said, and you might be surprised to hear I disagree with it. You said that trans people and their existence isn't political. And you believe that, correct?
Well, yeah, but I think I know what you may say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like kind of everything is political, and like us fighting for rights is political. Maybe you're not going to say that, but I don't think it's political in the sense that I was born with that misalignment in my head. I felt like a girl since I was 5 years old. I wasn't political at 5 years old when I was feeling gender dysphoria.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying no gender dysphoria. That's not political. Well, again, everything is political in the sense that the way we interpret medical conditions is framed through like the modernist lens of the enlightenment. Like so, in that respect. However, in the sense that we refer to transness or transgenderism, we generally refer not to the medical condition of gender dysphoria, but rather to the identification, the process by one identifies as a gender other than their own. I would make the statement that everything, being trans, being cis, and being non binary, are all equally political because they rely on an equally political, equally arbitrary understanding of gender. And that by framing transness as legitimate only through the medicalization lens, you do a tremendous disservice, not only to non binary trans people, but also to trans people who don't experience dysphoria, trans people who aren't out yet, trans people who may be having doubts about themselves and their identity, and basically everyone who isn't you, out, passing, and beautiful.
Well, thank you for the last adjective. But I completely disagree. I think that the removal of the medical aspect of being trans does incredible harm to trans people because when we're just speaking about this is how I identify and that's it, maybe it's because I'm used to speaking to conservatives and I've been in those circles for years. That is literally white noise to conservatives and to people who, at the end of the day, we really are trying to make the case to that this is a legitimate thing. I absolutely believe there's a medical and scientific component to being trans. Um, Gender dysphoria exists, and that's a medical issue that we actually seek medical intervention for. My transition was medical intervention. My transition was me saying, okay, I have this misalignment. I can't even leave the house without feeling an incredible amount of distress over how I look and how people are perceiving me. So let me seek medical intervention, which is surgery, hormones, psychological help, and that's what I did. That's medical. And so for me, it's just the principle of are we acknowledging it as medical or not? And to me, you can't make the case that trans people deserve all of the equal access that we want and all the equal rights we want without backing it up at least somewhat for the same way that um, no one accepts racial dolezal as being transracial or being Black. No Black people that I've seen. Maybe you do, but it's incredibly 99.999% of the African American community does not see her as that because there's no medical basis for it. There's nothing we can point to in the brain that would make her feel as though she's Black.
Right.
And
What you're
that's why it's denied that she is what she says that she is. So
what
I
you're
don't.
talking about right now, though, is capitulation. Gender isn't a scientifically verifiable concept. It's a theory. We need
No, but
theory.
the misalignment in the brain is.
Well, no, sure, yeah. But when we talk about gender and therefore being transgender, we're relying explicitly on the existence of theory. Now, there can be medical science to verify the existence of things like gender dysphoria, and that may be a component in somebody's decision to transition or to identify as trans. But that doesn't really change the fact that it is ultimately a subsidiary of a broader political, theoretical framework by which we analyze gender, one which does not beck to the call of doctors and whatever diagnoses they prescribe. It seems to me like you believe that transness is gatekept behind suffering and medical legitimacy. And I don't think that's the case. I
I
think
don't think
trans people are authentically legitimate of their own volition without the help of any doctors giving them supplementary justifications.
but it's to me, it's impossible to remove the medical aspect of it. It just is. I mean,
Well, why?
my transition was medical and it saved my life.
Yeah,
And that is the case for every trans person I've ever met.
but
So
the doctors didn't make you trans, you know.
no, the doctors did not make me trans, but the doctors allowed me to live a life where I can cope with being trans. So therefore it's a medical treatment. Like I sought the help of doctors to alleviate the negative feelings of being trans and having dysphoria.
How
So
would you have argued in favor of the existence of
going to one second. And if we're going to insist that it's not medical and it's just this political stance or it's this political entity, I can guarantee you that there will never be a bridge to the divide that is conservatives who don't understand trans people and trans people. There will never be any
well,
progress.
there I don't believe there will anyway. Generally, social
I
progress
think that there
takes
can
place
be. I think
generally, social progress takes place when bigots die. That's kind of what we look to.
mm,
We can hem and haw all we like about social progress in the United States, but whether we like it or not, there's still a substantial portion of this country that believes miscegenation is a sin. We, generally speaking, just have to wait on the worst elements of society to die, and then we build a better society on the dirt. We
I don't
How
know.
would you have defended the legitimacy of trans people 20 years ago before gender dysphoria was a medically recognized condition?
Well, I'll answer that, but I really want to respond to what you just said first. Um, I genuinely don't believe the only way to get people to be okay with trans people is for them to die and people who don't to die. I genuinely don't think that's the truth because I see the opposite every single day. I do speaking events to people who come up to me and say, right now you changed my mind. I'm going to be accepting of my trans cousin, my trans son, my trans whatever. I get the majority of comments I get are from people who live their entire life either, at the least not understanding and at the worst hating trans people who are completely converted because they see trans for what it is, which was a medical issue that I took care of and then integrated into society and lived a productive life, paid my taxes, did all that,
But then you
as
create the
opposed
same
to it
problems
being
for others.
it being a political stance. And so for me, I've seen the formula of getting people to understand it for what it is and how it really does work. I've seen it. So nothing could convince me that those people just have to die.
Well,
I
this
really
is the definition right now of throwing people under the bus. What you're
yeah,
saying is the only way to rhetorically succeed and to convince the bigots in society, or if you prefer the term uninitiated, is by excluding the people who don't meet the respectability politics standards that you place. You just admitted to me that the reason why you talk about trans issues the way you do is because you don't think there's another way to justify your legitimacy as a trans woman in the eyes of people who aren't, to use a term, woke on gender theory. But in doing so, you throw other people under the bus. You just admitted that the reason you discount non binary people, the reason you frame transness through a medical lens, is so you can appeal to people who would otherwise not accept your existence. I would
no,
argue that this process of gaining legitimacy by throwing out the people who don't meet the respectability standards you pose does far more damage in the long term. And it's the same thing that gay, cis people did to you back 40, 50, 60 years ago. You might have been able to enjoy a much better standard of living from day one if our comrades at Stonewall hadn't thrown trans people under the bus and acceptance had grown more political and more popular back then.
I completely disagree. So for me, I think that non-binary people are valid in their own right. But I also think that it's important for them to make their case for their own equality, acceptance, quality of life without deciding for transsexuals that they are the same thing.
Well, they
So
are by definition. Transgender just means to
no,
identify as a gender other than that which you were
transgender.
assigned it. Well, by definition, it
I said
is.
transsexual.
Well, I agree that transgender and transsexual refer to different things. I'm actually one of the few people on the left that respect that distinction. There should be a difference in some way between a person who goes through what you have gone through, transitioning, social transition, what have you, and or who wants to do so, experiences dysphoria, and somebody who identifies as non-binary but is comfortable with their body. I acknowledge that distinction.
I'll say this. I recently did a episode of Vice News in which there was an LGBT debate, and there's people from all over the LGBT community. There was a Republican lesbian, liberal gay, Republican trans, liberal trans.
Mhm.
And there was also someone sitting next to me, and people who watched it spotted him. It was a Black man sitting next to me.
We called him the Matrix Man because of his cool glasses.
He did kind of remind me of the Matrix. So that person we're speaking of was born male, presents as a man, but was trying to insist that he is the same thing as me because he's non-binary and trans.
Yeah, you're both trans.
Okay, and that can be your opinion, but I'll say this. I don't think, imagine if I wasn't on that panel and it was just that person speaking for people like me, this man who identifies as a man, self-portrays as a man, dresses as a man, lives as a man unless he tells you otherwise. That person has wildly different experiences than the transsexual sitting next to him, which was me.
Mhm.
So
You can both. Sorry.
it couldn't be more different. On a realistic level, that would be, I don't know how you identify, if you're just cis and you're okay with that.
You can call me big boy, okay? That's how everyone else calls me.
Okay,
Please don't actually. I'm just a man.
so you are the same thing, big boy, as the Matrix boy that was sitting next to me, right? With the exception of them calling themselves trans and non-binary, you essentially are the same thing. You were born male, you present as male, you dress as male, and you go through the world being perceived by every single person around you as male.
Mhm.
So, do you think that you can attest to or effectively speak about transitioning and the plight of being a transsexual and being trans in general to the same effectiveness or even a fraction of the degree that I could? I don't think that you could.
Well,
You're born male
I
and you
am.
go through the world as male. I was born male and changed as much as I could and go through the world as female. It's very, very, very different. The same way that Rachel Dolezal couldn't sit next to uh, name any Black celebrity and speak and feel
Well,
the same way and
no,
be the same.
I want to leave the Rachel Dolezal thing aside because there's a pretty big difference between the theory behind transgenderism and transracialism. But if we speak exclusively to the paneling there on Vice, we saw that video. I yelled. It was good. Excuse me, goodness. We saw that video, and I would agree with you. I do not believe that the livid experiences of you and a non-binary person like them, Caleb, I believe their name is. I have wildly different livid experiences, and I believe that you should both have the opportunity to speak in your own advocacy on your own time. The difference is, on Caleb's time, Caleb advocates for the rights of what you would call transsexuals, and on your time, you advocate against the rights of them.
What rights have I advocated against in terms of transsexuals?
I mean, you frame transness. Oh, no, in terms of transsexuals, you're very much in favor of them. In terms of non-binary people, you stand explicitly against them, saying that they're delusional, that they're not actually trans, that they're overriding the voices of legitimate trans people when they
I don't
speak.
think I've ever used the word delusional to describe a non-binary person. I simply think it's a different thing. I genuinely don't think I've used that word. I just think it's a separate thing. But the problem is, trans people did not decide that trans is an umbrella term. They didn't. people who claim to be non-binary, beyond gender, as Jamie on the panel said, queer, gender non-conforming, they all decided that all of that is to be shoved into the trans label. That was not the decision of actual trans people. The real world effect of that is that those lines get blurred. So you can say that you believe that, you know, we all have our right and possibly duty to advocate for our own interests, you know, separately of each other, but that's not what happens when it's very rare. That Vice panel was actually kind of groundbreaking in the fact that they had a transsexual and a non-binary person both talking about being trans and transness. What usually happens when Vice does these kind of things and other mainstream publications, it will be a bunch of people who identify as non-binary talking about what's in the best interest of trans people.
I'm sorry, but I have not noticed that. I do not feel like non-binary people are speaking over the experiences of trans people. And even if they were, you don't get to decide, you and other transsexuals don't get to decide what fits under the term transgender. Technically, non-binary people fit the bill. I mean, transgender just means to identify as a gender. I'm sorry?
Maybe under transgender, but what I'm trying to get into the habit of, and I slip up occasionally because I don't like conflating the two, is transsexuals and transgender. Transsexuals defined as feeling psychologically or emotionally that you belong to the opposite sex. That is much different than some sort of umbrella. That's kind of a very clear-cut term. And so when you say that you are above gender or you're genderqueer, it's very, very different. But what happens is it all becomes the same thing.
If I may, I have a slight problem with this rhetorically.
Well, one second, just 1 second. And what happens is the real life ramifications of that is that in the eyes of people who at best don't understand or at worst hate trans people, it's all the same thing and no one knows what to do with it. When in reality, I don't think it's that hard to understand me saying to someone, hi, I'm trans. That means that I was born male, but I'm much more comfortable presenting this way. And that's fine. I think anyone can understand that.
The problem that I have with this, and I understand what you're saying, the problem that I have broadly is that you're lying to me right now. You have said that non-binary people don't exist or that they are delusional. And what you're telling me right now is that you oppose their presence under the trans umbrella because they speak over you in the same breath that you say that alienating them is the only way to capitulate to the expectations of a right-leaning audience. I don't think you have a strong ideological basis for opposing their legitimacy. I think you're lying to justify an excuse to throw them under the bus to make yourself seem more palatable to a Republican audience.
No, I've definitely have never said non-binary people do not exist. I think that would be kind of stupid. Those people, there are people that exist, and those people occasionally call themselves non-binary. Those people exist. My argument is that it's not the same thing as me. And I feel as though I have, you know, an allegiance to people like me and people suffering. And I could get honestly very emotional thinking about when I go out and do these speaking events and I talk to trans people and I talk to people who are having a very, very hard time. And I would rather advocate for them than for a group of people that have in the last few years decided that they're the same thing as me when their lives are 110% different.
See, do you hear your language right now? This is the language of exclusionary politics. Nobody's asking you to go out there and be a representative defending non-binary people. They're asking you to stop shitting on them, which you do.
No, if non-binary people, genderqueer people, beyond gender people, when they decide they're the same thing as me, and then I'm
they say, well, they're both trans. They're not saying they're transsexual, but they are trans by definition.
Okay, but when these people claim that they are the exact same thing as me, then when I go out,
they don't though. They're trans by definition. They're not. I have never seen a non-binary person say they have the same experiences as somebody like you who experiences gender dysphoria.
I know, and they'll honestly, quite often they will be quick to say we don't have the exact same experiences, and that's fine. But the problem is when they decide, maybe loosely, that they're the same thing as me and that we're all under the T in LGBT. Then when I go to these speaking events and I go and I speak on behalf of the T, not speaking for them as a representative, but in regards to trying to kind of get people to understand it more, then I am speaking on behalf of them as well. And that becomes a problem because, like you have admitted and like I have stated, it's very, very, very different.
The problem is, by engaging your trans medicalist perspective on trans issues, you are ostracizing them. What you're saying is that the only way that gender nonconforming people can buy legitimacy in the public space is through the recommendation of a doctor, or that medical theory or something being wrong with the brain is the only way to explain trans or non-binary people, when the reality, frankly, is much simpler. The gender is a spook. It doesn't exist for us. It's a vestigial fuck about some bit of society that doesn't really need to be around. And sometimes that vestigial system hurts people. It hurt you, and it continues to hurt you. And it
Well,
hurts
here's the
non binary people too. And you could advocate for your own rights without throwing them under the bus, as you do by promoting trans medicalism, by speaking of them in a way which denotes illegitimacy. But you don't. And I know why, because I know the kind of people who watch you. They like you, obviously. I mean, you're well loved, but they're also conservatives, and
you're
conservatives are not woke.
wrong. That's crazy. That is the biggest misconception about my audience. The biggest.
You don't think you have a conservative audience?
I think I have an incredibly politically diverse audience. I think I have a huge liberal audience. I think that it's almost 50-50. So I think that there is often this conversation of the people who watch Blaire are all conservatives and they're kind of older white men. And like, if you have ever been to one of my meetups or one of my speaking events, or even just look at people who comment on my Instagram, it is literally the exact opposite. It's mostly teenagers and young adults. 25 is like the max. I have under 25 audience, and it is a lot of LGBT people, almost mostly LGBT people, and it is a lot. It's not even
You're lying to me again.
No, I'm not.
You exist. I'm sorry, you exist in the conservative space online. You're not as far right as somebody like Crowder or Ben Shapiro. That's
No,
unquestionable.
but you
But
can't tell me
you said yourself that you exist to appease these audiences, and
Mm-mm,
your discography speaks for itself.
no,
Your YouTube videos clearly pander to a reactionary audience. And I
no,
get,
you
well,
cannot tell me that you know my audience better than I know my audience. I'm sorry.
well,
You just
well,
can't.
wait. But I can't let you lie to me. I'm not telling
But I'm
you I
not
know. I'm not telling you I know it better than you. You're right. You're right. You do know it better than me. You're just
I know my
misrepresenting
audience.
it.
I know who watches me. And in fact, I did an Instagram post just a few weeks ago, and I asked people to comment, what do you politically identify as? There was no majority of conservatives, not even close.
I don't
I really,
particularly care how people self-identify. You're a Republican and a conservative, and it shows in the rhetoric you use, the way you title your videos, the content you decide to cover, and the people who show up defending you. I don't know why you're hiding from this. It's fine to be a conservative.
it really is just not true. And I don't know, maybe I could like log into my YouTube right now and look at all my analytics. It just really isn't true. If you've ever been to a meetup of mine, it couldn't be more politically, racially, and gender diverse. It just couldn't be. I truly, I really can't like sit here and really like be convinced by you that all my audience are Republicans and conservatives. Do I exist? Have I done a lot of right-wing media? Have I done interviews on right-wing channels? Yes, absolutely. Does that mean the majority of my fans are of that? Honestly, no, because I came up doing videos about gender and sexuality. I came up doing videos about my life. I have a vlog channel where I don't talk about politics at all. I really, I can't let you just insist that my fans are all Republican and conservative. It's not a thing.
I mean, do we really want to go
It's
over this?
not a thing.
Because
It's,
you denying that you cater to a conservative audience is absurd as me pretending I cater to a non like left leaning audience. You know?
okay, well, well, if we're talking about catering, do I have Republican views? Absolutely. Do I have some right-wing views? Absolutely. But if you watch my videos beyond titles and the sort of caricature of me online, my videos are actually all pretty nuanced.
No, yeah, I agree. You do clickbait titles, which I do too. I'm not ashamed. I get it.
Called
Yeah,
being a YouTuber. You have to. That's
yeah,
called
yeah,
being
yeah. No, I've watched your actual videos. They're never as conservative as the titles might suggest. But
exactly. But then but I'm glad you said that though, because if it was that I was this hardline conservative Republican, then I would have that audience. But in reality, it's not the case. I mean, we think, and even if we think about the right-wing media I've done a lot of right-wing media where I go on and I challenge the person. My first episode on Louder with Crowder, who's very staunchly Republican, very staunchly conservative, was me going on because I had an issue with him because he was conflating cross-dressers and trans people.
Okay, well, we can go down if you want. I mean, if you want to talk about like appealing to the more conservative side of gender issues, are you a feminist?
I don't label myself feminist now.
Do you believe that? How do you feel about putting kids on hormone blockers?
I'm generally against it.
Okay. How do you feel about how many genders there are?
But
wait. But how many genders do you think there are?
I think that there are two genders, there are two sexes, but I really want to respond to what the topic you just brought up was hormone blockers. There's also a very big misconception that it's like this conservative belief that kids shouldn't be on hormone blockers. You don't know how many like people from all over the political spectrum, even apolitical people who have an issue with that and watch my videos about kids on hormone blockers and hormones, etc., and have an issue with it. And how many like trans people I know in real life, and how many trans people I know in real life who are maybe apolitical or even not conservative that have an issue with it.
It's conservatives. It's mostly propagated by conservative channels. The only people who speak disparagingly of hormone blockers for children are channels like Crowder's or Tim Pool's or Ben Shapiro's or James Allsup's. It's always right-leaning people who say that transness is a mental illness and that if you put your kid on hormone blockers, it will force them to be trans and then they will kill themselves. Or
it's definitely a very popular stance in the conservative arena. But what I'm trying to say is that it's one of those things also that I think a lot of people see the nuance in, and that not everyone who thinks that that is bad or worth taking a second look at is conservative. And that's what I'm trying to say.
Well, the hormone blockers thing is pretty dumb. The opposition to it is pretty stupid and conservative. By the way, I've been just linked to this. Here's a link of your YouTube channel in a broad cross-sectional analysis that shows where you exist relative to other political YouTubers, and you are firmly right. Most of your content links around with other right-leaning considered channels. There are a couple.
In terms of collabs, because I've seen collab graphs.
In terms of the people who watch your shit, where they come from and where they go next. I've linked it to you. The only left-leaning channel I see on here that is related to yours is, funnily enough, ContraPoints. And she seems to watch quite a bit of your content, given how she orients some of her characterizations.
Yeah, and that's fine, but I still know my audience, and I know that I have a lot of people who are not conservative who watch me.
Well, I'm looking at your audience right now using data rather than anecdotes, and it's very clearly conservative leaning.
Okay, but you're just looking at people who view the videos and recommended oftentimes will be videos from conservative commentators. I don't think that means everyone who watches me is conservative or agrees with me. You'll be surprised how many people comment on my channel. I agree with nothing of what you said, but I find you entertaining. Those people are not conservatives. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's that important to the conversation where all my audience leans to. I'd rather talk about my own.
No, that's fair. I mean, I don't really care. I probably have a pretty large Nazi audience just because I argue against Nazis so often. They like hate follow me, So maybe if that showed up in the data, it'd be like, I have a link to Eric Stryker, and people be like, what the fuck? But you're solidly located in the right-leaning section with almost all of your views coming from and going to other distinctly conservative channels. That's how the YouTube pipeline works. It's just a fact of orienting yourself in that space.
Okay, well, perhaps it is, but at the end of the day, I just know that my audience is very diverse, and especially if you probably were to compare it to a Louder with Crowder or
Crowder's a fascist. Fuck him and fuck everyone who watches him.
A Dave Rubin or any of those channels. I think that out of those, I probably have the most politically diverse audience.
Well, yeah. To be fair,
our actual beliefs, honestly.
Crowder is a low bar, though. He's like an actual fucking fascist. Didn't you dunk on him in your channel recently? I didn't have time to watch the video myself, but
I gave a bit of a nuanced analysis of how I thought that some of his jokes and bagging on LGBT issues all the time were less than genuine and were unfunny, for sure. and haven't been on his channel in a really long time, but yeah, that was a thing.
Can I want to talk more about the hormone blockers thing. This is pretty much a settled argument in the scientific space. I actually have the data together on a sheet. Like the putting kids on hormone blockers thing, like this is 100% a non-issue. But it's been blown up into a big issue by a lot of conservative channels, Crowder being the most egregious example. And one of the ways he's able to do this is through the lens of trans medicalization that you use. He's talking about how if you go on hormones, you know, you're gambling because it increases the likelihood of you transitioning. And if you do, you've got a 20 times higher rate of suicide. So if you put your kids on hormone blockers, you're basically consigning them to a coin flip of whether or not they're going to kill themselves. And that rhetoric, that language is entirely compatible with your perspective on transness, that it's essentially a mental illness that gets corrected medically.
Well, first of all, I take a bit of an issue saying that my views align with Crowder's on trans people. I take a lot of issue with a lot of the way Crowder talks about trans people. I think that the way he talks about it is, I saw a tweet of his yesterday was something about, what did he say? He said something about men cutting their dicks off and calling themselves women. It's like, I think often
He does all the fucking
the way
time.
he talks about it is very, very simple. It lacks the nuance and the intellect sometimes that I think the trans topic deserves. So I really take issue with that, especially because
Wait, you think that just lacks nuance, calling them mentally ill people who just cut off their dicks? You think that's just a little nuance away from being a good thing?
No, I think it's really, 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 really douchey. And I think it really reduces the topic to just inflammatory tweets in the sake of likes. And that's actually what I've said about Crowder, is that he doesn't actually feel that way in real life. And that's the case with a lot of the commentators. It's the machine where you're constantly pumping out content, especially on Twitter, which is why I don't even really use Twitter anymore. I think the last time I tweeted beyond a reply tweet was like in May, because I don't like the expectation to just reinforce biases and say things for likes, and that's what Twitter encourages. So no, it's not just lacking nuance. I think that he is oftentimes really, really douchey about trans people. What was I going to say? And that's exemplified by my first ever appearance on the show, which was me challenging him because we had Twitter beef over it. So. But I forget where we were at.
Well, the problem is that while you two may have different views on trans issues, and you do, like unquestionably, the problem is
the fact that trans people deserve respect, and he thinks it's the opposite. That's a really big distinction.
But the problem, it is a distinction. Well, I mean, you don't advocate for respect for.
It's the difference between treating someone with respect and like a person and not. Like that's kind of the biggest distinction you could make.
I mean, I agree that it's a distinction. The problem is you only advocate for respect for a very small slice of the trans pie. So plenty of people could advocate the exact same thing against you. Non-binary people in particular.
I don't think so.
Well, they would. You've literally like denied their legitimacy and denied their existence under the trans umbrella. They would have every bit the same right to make that claim against you. That you threw them under the bus the same way Crowder will do with you.
Okay, well, it really is my belief that trans shouldn't be an all-encompassing umbrella, and that's just how I feel, because like I said, I've seen what it takes to have a person understand trans people and be okay with them. And I'm telling you right now, there's a way to get people to understand and be okay with trans people, and it's not by introducing yourself as Jamie did in that video.
So is it what you believe, or is it what you say you believe to appeal to a conservative audience? Because those are very different things.
It's both. It's what I really believe, and it's because I know that that's what it takes. It's what I really believe. There's a difference between, let's just bring it down to this level.
Do you think it's a coincidence that your belief on this is exactly the same belief you would have if you were just trying to appease an audience, regardless of what you actually did believe?
No. And that's actually my biggest pet peeve in YouTube politics and in this sphere, is that everyone thinks that everyone's saying everything just to appease to a person and pandering, rather than the shocking idea that maybe that's what they actually think. Because trust me, I call out people all the time for saying things they don't actually believe. Right-wing commentators mostly. It's the truth.
No, what? Wait, no, 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 no. I don't disagree on that. My problem is again that everyone. This could be said exactly the same about you. That is entirely possible. There are plenty of contentious opinions I have. My gender abolitionism sometimes put me up against like very left leaning trans people. But in spite of the fact that I have ideological differences with how some idpol stuff works in the far left, I advocate tirelessly through everyone who is harmed by gender standards. The gender standards that hurt you, the gender standards that hurt non-binary people. But you've chosen to defend yourself and your existence through a lens that not only gives ammunition to people like Crowder, but also very explicitly excludes people who don't meet your standards. Again, passing out and attractive, which
here's the thing. At the end of the day, and I'm going to sound very far left activisty here.
I'm ready. I love it. I'm here.
Everyone bear with me. You are a cis person explaining to a trans person what trans is and shouldn't be. That's what's happening here. You're telling me that I should let go of the notion that there is a medical component to being trans. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to pretend as if medical intervention wasn't absolutely necessary for me in being trans and every trans person I've ever met in my entire life. I'm not going to pretend.
Well, that's because you use a different definition of trans.
I'm not going to pretend as if there's not a neurological link to feelings of wanting to be the opposite gender. I'm not going to pretend there's not a link based in a misalignment that was in my brain from my birth, whether it be from hormone imbalances in the womb or anything else. I'm not going to pretend like that doesn't exist simply so
I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Nobody has said
that. But you're saying that I shouldn't use any of those things that I just said, the brain, hormones, any of that, gender dysphoria, any of that. You're saying that I shouldn't use that to try to explain why people should probably not be a dick to trans people. And for me, I think it's the best possible
do you know what it reminds me of? Well, it's not.
Please, 1 second. I think, in my opinion, it's the best possible argument than just saying we take everything at face value and you just say that you're trans and that means that you are. Having said that, I know for a fact that a lot of people who identify, I don't know about a lot, I know people that occasionally identify as non-binary who eventually come to a point where they say, that's not actually what I am. That was kind of a middle road to me understanding that I'm actually trans and I'm going to transition. And I think that that is 110% valid because for a while, and people probably have seen the pictures of me as a teenager, I never called myself non-binary or use any labels like that, but I definitely existed in a place where I was like presenting very ambiguously, and some people thought I was a woman, some people thought I was a man. And I eventually came to a point where I realized I was just a boring binary trans woman. So I understand that. My only contention with it is I don't think it's the same thing.
It's not the same thing, but it falls under the same umbrella.
It's not the same thing. And so we shouldn't use the same arguments.
No, you don't have to use the same arguments. You just have to use arguments that don't exclude other people. It reminds me a little bit of when people were like, hey, listen, you shouldn't be homophobic. Gay people can't help it. They were born that way. They can't help that they're like this. It's a way of very paternalistically assigning them legitimacy in a way that's
an amazing argument. That's an amazing argument. Saying someone
wait, really? You think that's a good argument to defend the respectability of gay people? To say they can't help it?
Yes. The best possible argument to someone who does not understand being gay is to say, listen, I was born this way. I'm not going to change, so please don't expect me to change.
The correct argument is that all people are legitimate unless proved otherwise. And that language ostracizes.
No, everyone's legitimate. Everyone is legitimate, and everyone deserves everything everyone else has. Well, that's a bit of a stretch. Everyone deserves equal.
I'm a communist too, don't worry.
Everyone deserves equal opportunity. But I'm sorry, that is the argument that converted a lot of people in this country who were saying
by fucking over other people.
No. By saying no. The argument for the longest time against, and I remember this, okay, I'm 25 years old. I remember very well the era around like 2006, 2008, and a few years beyond that, where the gay marriage argument was that being gay is a sin, that being gay is a choice, being gay is something you can stop. And honestly, the most persuasive argument has always been, excuse me, I've always been gay. I can't change that. that's something that happened, you know, that's something in my mind and in my heart, and it's not something I can be converted out
Yeah,
of.
no, that's like saying don't make fun of a kid with Down syndrome because they were born that way. A person's legitimacy shouldn't be
No,
based on whether or not they can help
that's
being. No, 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 no,
irrelevant.
no, no, no. Wait, hold on. You had your time. A person's legitimacy shouldn't be based on whether or not they were born that way. It should be based on them and their existence and the authenticity of one's lived experiences.
Okay, so with
Wait. Everything that you say right now about trans people and trans medicalism fits perfectly within the worldview of a transphobe. A
okay,
transphobe can
no,
watch it.
okay,
Well, hold
no,
on. No,
I'm
please,
a transphobe.
please. You talk for a while. A
Okay.
transphobe can watch Steven Crowder, go like, ha, yeah, fucking, you know, they're mentally ill. They cut their dicks off. And you can watch that, and then they can go over to your video, and they can listen to you talk about how transness is defined by a medical disorder that requires medical intervention to treat. And they can think like, yeah, you know, Blaire White, she is one of the good ones, I guess. She recognizes it's a mental illness. They can't help it. It buys you legitimacy and a small group of people at the expense of derision, and there is derision against you within your community. I've seen it, but it fucks over the entire broader political space that you're a part of. Capitulating to the sensibilities of bigots has never been and will never be a way of securing progress. It didn't work for any civil rights group at any point in history. Gay liberation was not brought about by suited gays talking about how, like, oh, you know, it's just a mental disorder, whatever, we can't help it. It was brought about by queer folk on the left who pushed hard in political spaces for their legitimacy. Same with black folk, same with fucking workers and union strikes back in the early 20th century. At every point in history, social progress is made on the backs of people who push against bigotry, not who capitulate to it. And by capitulating to it, not only are you harming non-binary people and fucking everyone else who you think doesn't fit under the trans umbrella, you're hurting yourself, because you will only ever be a dog to the people who are above you, the Crowders and the Ben Shapiros and the other people who rule your political space. You will only ever be one of the good ones. No different than Jesse Lee Peterson, no different than Anthony Bryan Logan, no different than any other fucking Uncle Tom who walks in and gets to be one of the good old boys because they capitulate to the beliefs of bigots. And it's frustrating to me because I don't think you're like that. I think that fundamentally you're scared of losing that tiny grasp of power you've been able to get, the social legitimacy you've earned in the public space.
No.
You've traded for that. There has been a cost.
Can I respond, please?
I've talked for a while. You can respond.
I legitimately believe that explaining to people that I was born this way is a solid argument for why I should probably not be fucked with, bullied, and mistreated. The same way that I think that that was a legitimate argument for gay people. I think it helped a lot of people understand, of course, I'm not going to be a dick to someone who can't help that they're gay. I think that's legitimate. I really, truly do. And with the line of thinking that you're explaining, it sounds as like you would view a Rachel Dolezal just as valid as any other Black person, just on the basis of her saying, I am Black, without pointing to anything to back it up. And I don't think that you would really think that.
Do we want to? We can talk about why transracialism and transgenderism aren't like comparable theoretically, if you would like to.
No, they're definitely two incredibly different things. However, it's the same thing to say we are accepting someone exactly as what they say they are just because they say it.
Yeah, because gender is 100% a means of identity. It's never existed. There's no biological basis for gender. That's nonsense. No one believed that. No one believed that.
I think race is a means of identity as well. The difference is someone who is born Black and is Black, it's different than saying, I live my life as a white woman, but now I am Black.
The difference is that gender is typically regarded as a way of processing.
Your set of experiences, the way that you're treated, the way you move through the world, it is all so different that it cannot be compared, which is my only argument for why my set of experiences, the way I'm treated, and the way I move through the world is very different than someone who is not a transsexual. That is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, but nobody is saying that they are. I have never heard a non-binary, non-gender dysphoria experiencing person go on to say,
no, but by insisting that we
not insisting, you are both trans by the definition of trans. You both fit under that. On a linguistic sense, you are objectively both trans.
right? But I personally resent that in the same way that a lot of Black women would resent saying that linguistically, because Rachel Dolezal says I am
No,
Black.
but no, they're different. What you're doing the reactionary argument. You're saying, "Oh, you can identify as a woman? Huh, identify as a dog then." You're saying that any means of self-identification is equal to No, you are. You're saying, "Well, if gender is just identity and there's no medical component, then why can't you just identify as Black?" It's the same bad faith argument they make. And we can talk about the
It's not
difference
bad
between
faith,
transracialism and
though.
transgenderism
It's
if you
not
want.
bad faith, because I promise you, I am coming into this with nothing but good faith and with my allegiance and my goals. Literally, my entire goal with everything I do in my career is to help normalize trans people.
Okay,
That's
well,
all.
my
And you
argument
have an
my
issue
argument would
with
be I would have two arguments for the difference here.
I was like gonna finish my sentence. And you definitely, as some other people do, have an issue in the manner in which that I do it. But it's a very hard sell, and it's very hard to convince me that it's not the proper way when I see it firsthand. When mothers of trans kids come up to me in person after events and say, I'm going to treat my trans kid like a human being now because of what I've seen here. So for me, I can't see myself dropping the medical component of being trans.
Yeah, but that's capitulation. You just described that. There's the same Black people do
Not,
the
it's
same thing.
not
Like, hey,
manipulating.
wait, do you know Anthony Bryan Logan? He's like a Black conservative. He thinks like the KKK wasn't that bad. There are
What about who?
Anthony Bryan Logan. He's a Black guy on YouTube, a conservative. He's probably had quite a few people come up to him and they've been like, hey, I thought all Negroes were like disgusting and like stupid and low IQ, but you've shown me that you're pretty good. And then they'll like shake a hand. That's basically what you're saying. You're getting tepid, lukewarm, conditional acceptance from a group of
It's
people.
not lukewarm acceptance for someone to say, I'm not going to kick my trans kid out of the house now. That's not lukewarm. That's life
But the
changing.
non-binary kids, huh? They get yeeted.
No, absolutely not. I think it's disgusting to kick your trans kid out or your child out for any reason. I think it's disgusting how there are people in this world who are truly reprehensible people, thieves, rapists, murderers, who have family acceptance, and trans people and gender nonconforming people can't have even a fraction of that amount of acceptance. I think it's disgusting. I would never say I think that non-binary people or people who identify as any of the things we've talked about here, I think it's unacceptable that they would be treated badly by anyone.
But they are because of you espoused by
And I
people like
know they
you.
are because I lived my life as a gender nonconforming person for a very long time. I used to have a purple mullet and I used to walk around the house with glitter boots. Like, I know that. Like, I
Me
totally
too, comrade. I get it.
I I get that. And I had family treat me very, very badly for it. However, I just think it's so different that it's frustrating when it gets conflated.
Well, but
That's
again,
my
nobody is They are both. I mean, it's not a conflation if they're both by definition trans. If there are people out there who are saying the lived experiences of non-binary people are identical to the lived experiences of transsexual people, such as yourself, I would argue against that easily. I would have an easy time arguing against that. But I have not heard people conflating. What I have heard is rhetoric coming from
I've
you.
heard a lot of it. I've heard a lot of it, but what I will say that I think the most useless thing we could do really is go back and forth about definitions, to be honest. For me, I'm really approaching this just in a real world kind of aspect, which is that the lived experiences are so different that when I'm arguing why someone should be okay with people like me, it doesn't really, it's so different. And I think that non-binary people should be able to argue for all of those things on their own accord without saying, I'm the same. I mean, listen, just a real world.
I'm not asking you to stand up for non-binary people. I'm asking you to not step on them on your way up.
The Matrix guy next to me on the Vice thing was born a male, dresses as a male, presents as a male, and wants to be included as the same thing as me.
No. Again, no. You keep using dishonest language. They don't want to be included. They are trans.
That falls under the T. I'm sorry. That's dishonest.
No, it's not. No. But Blaire, I'm sorry. You're both trans.
No, we're not. That
You
guy.
are. No, I'm sorry. Trans literally means identifying as a gender other than that which you were assigned at birth. You both fit that definition equally well. I don't know why you're so insistent. Just say they're trans, we're both trans. However, I am transsexual. I have gender dysphoria. This is a distinction that's recognized in lefty circles too. I don't know why you're pretending that, like, by acknowledging the fact that you're both trans, that one of you is like usurping the other's social power.
I think the problem is abbreviating transsexual and transgender into trans, because I think that's what makes everything connected. I think that would be the thing, is if we all stop saying trans and we really just say out the full word. I think that's the problem. Because if I was not on that panel and Raquel, the other trans woman, she had the locks, and I think she was dressed in blue. If we were not
the one with the big hair.
Yeah, I think if we were not on that panel and it was just the Matrix guy and Jamie, and the term trans was being used to describe everything that they were talking about, that's a problem for me, because the only two transsexuals that were on that stage were myself and Raquel. So I think really the problem is we really.
So you have to shit on them? Why?
No one's shitting on them.
Well, you are. The trans medicalist rhetoric, in addition to being technically incorrect, is also exclusionary. You've said that it's good for, like, appealing to a minority, like a broader
transgender, and so I think it's important that we start getting in the habit of saying transsexual instead of transgender. That's something I've tried to do, but I've spent so long saying transgender that I go back more between the two. I'm going to start saying transsexual, because I would very much like it to be clear to people who do not understand trans people that there's a difference between a transsexual and the Matrix guy sitting next to me, who was born a man, presents as a man, goes through the world as a man. Very, very fucking different.
Yes, there are differences. However, you are both trans. The fact that you resist this so ardently is evident to your bigotry. But why can't you just say we're both trans, but we have different lived experiences because of my dysphoria? So I think that I add a valued perspective where they cannot. That's totally valid. The liviest libcuck on earth would not shit on you for that take.
Okay, then that's probably the take that we should probably all start using. I think we need to really differentiate between transsexuals and people who fall under, for a while it was the trans asterisk label. Then I guess I'm not trans asterisk, I'm a transsexual, and I think that's an important distinction to make. And the other thing is, like, that's a very important distinction to make for, like, every transsexual I've ever met in my life. So and I'm not trying to be offensive here, but the majority of people who argue to me that the Matrix guy who was born male, presents as male, and goes through the world as male is the same as me, the main people who argue that is really people like you who are not trans, even remotely.
No. This is a very you both meet the medical definition of trans.
I don't think transgender is a medical definition. I think that that's a political definition.
Right, the linguistic definition, then the etymological definition, the philosophical definition, you both mean it. It doesn't matter if I'm cis or trans, and I don't believe that my gender identity makes me any more or less right here. I'm not ignoring your lived experiences here.
No, it doesn't, but I just think it's worth noting that it's never transsexuals trying to keep everything under the same term. So I think
I've got a lot of trans people in my community, like thousands of them. For some reason, I collect them. I have no idea why. And they are very much in line with my perspective on this, that the trans medicalist, like a lexicon, is a means by which trans people are not only derided, that their existence is justified only through suffering and medical intervention, but also that it's invalid non-binary people.
I don't think our existence is justified only through suffering and medical. No, I don't think that's true. I won't want that.
Well, gender dysphoria, I would unquestionably call that like a form of suffering. It's a medical illness.
I think to varying degrees, but I also think that being someone who's on the other end of transitioning, that suffering doesn't exist for me. So,
and that's good, and I want everyone to be able to experience that, even non-binary people who may not be fit within the binary but still experience some kind of gender dysphoria.
And I think non-binary people who experience gender dysphoria are likely to be those individuals that I spoke of earlier, who kind of see non-binary as like a middle point, and then they eventually end up identifying the same way that I do. And I think that that's valid, but I have an issue with people who experience no dysphoria, and the Matrix guy is a perfect example. Like, I have an issue being conflated in the minds of the public as being the same thing
I
as that.
don't think people do. Maybe listen, maybe no. Maybe in right-leaning circles, yes, because right-leaning people don't understand nuance. But in the left-leaning circles, we recognize that difference. And you know what? You and I are the same in a respect. We're both human. You and they are the same in the respect. You're
No,
both
yeah, but if we're specifically having a discussion like the Vice panel in the context of LGBT issues, when I say my name's Blaire and I'm trans, the next person to me who was born male, presents as male, and goes through the world as male says, I'm trans. How do you think that translates to the people who actually stand in the way of like trans acceptance and people who don't get it? They're like, okay, so if that one's trans, then how is that one trans? I think the problem is
capitulating to bigots. That's what you're describing right now.
no. I have an issue with calling everyone who doesn't understand trans people bigots as well.
Listen. Well, maybe this is a definitional thing. I set a very low bar for bigotry. I think most people are bigots, so I stand by that.
The definition of bigotry is something loosely like an intolerance for people who believe other than you. And I think actually there are certainly a lot of those when it comes to trans people. I'm not denying that.
Like the entire Republican Party.
However, I think that that's also a generalization that I think is incorrect. I will also say that I think that there is an equally large amount of people who don't have bigotry towards trans people, but genuinely do not understand it and maybe don't care to understand it. Maybe they want to understand it, but just don't get it. Because I think there's a statistic like less than like 5% of people in the country know a trans person in their life. It's a very small amount. And I think what really helped sort of spearhead rights and equality for gay people, even though things are not perfect, was the fact that like most people know someone who's gay. So I think that helped a lot. I think that when you know someone who is, I think it helps you be kinder and more understanding. So I think there's a lot of people who just don't understand trans people because they've never met someone like
But the thing is, you can make the same argument for every other civil rights thing. Black people back in the 1960s don't organize and fight for your rights. That scares the white folk. What we need to do is we need to dress real nice, and we need to go out there and we need to put on our best accents, and we need to show the white folk that we ain't a threat to them. This is, I joke now, but these are identical lines of thought. They're comparable.
Except not, because when have I said that we shouldn't be organizing for our rights? I've never in my life stated that.
Well, sure, but you regularly shit on leftist trans advocates who disagree with your trans medicalist perspective. You do talk against people who organize in favor of your demographics' political interests.
I have never stood against the rights of trans people in my life. I have never said that this is a right and that trans people should not have it. I have never in my life stated that. That's just literally not what I do. So I don't really
wait. Maybe we can. I think we can bring this in hard. Okay, you believe that gender is the same as sex, right? Or do you don't?
No.
Okay, cool. So we both agree that gender is a social construct?
I think it is partially socially constructed, but I think that we would be amiss to not acknowledge that there are some aspects of gendered behavior that have biological links and are biologically came to be. But I think that a lot of aspects, especially in regards to superficial things like clothing and who enters the door first, and a lot of things are socially constructed for sure, but I don't think it's fair to say all of it. And I do think there's a difference between gender and sex.
Well, okay, good. What would you say is a non-socially constructed aspect of gender?
Let's see. I think that sort of men steering more towards being dominant in a relationship or sexually is definitely biologically linked. Obviously, there are very dominant women. So that's obviously not entirely, but I think that that's biological to an extent. I think that's evolutionary.
Do you agree there's a social component to it as well, that men are like socialized to be like big?
No, for sure. I think that it's reinforced by society, but I think that came about to be through evolution. I
Okay,
think
so
that
that's like an anthropological evolutionary approach towards gender, which I don't think is entirely invalid. There are definitely elements of like gendered society that are products of innate biological differences
yeah,
between.
it's brought about by nature, but because it was brought about by nature, society expects to maintain it that way. So we do reinforce it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. So here's my contention: if we both believe that gender is a social construct, by and large, there's biologically reinforced elements, but for the most part, a social construct. Would you not agree with me then in saying that there might be some legitimacy to the argument that gender as a social construct harms people because there are people who are born into a mindset where they will never be able to conform to the binary without injuring themselves, mental health problems. I mean, I imagine you never coming out as trans, for example. I imagine that
No,
would.
yeah, I think it definitely harms some people. Growing up, when I was a very, very effeminate boy, and having the entire world, my classmates, my family not understand me, definitely harmed me. I'm not one of those trans people who has ever had severely suicidal thoughts, something like that. But it definitely caused distress in my life. It caused bullying. It caused me to drop out of high school. I didn't drop out of high school. I went to homeschool. I finished high school. I have a degree, not a degree, but I have a fucking diploma.
Gotcha.
Um, so that happened for sure. I think that we can acknowledge that for the most part, gender roles work for the majority of people,
Wait,
but
why?
obviously the world is not black and white, and there are people who don't really meet those expectations, and it can cause to varying degrees distress in their own life for sure.
What if we killed gender? What if we shot it in the back of the head? Ignore for a moment, please. Ignore praxis or practicality. Ignore convincing conservatives or whatever. What if we had script control of the world? If we abolished gender as a concept, if we recognize that it's arbitrary, that it leads to harm, and that by and large, every social function that we need to live in society today can be done without it. It's not like we need gender roles to like exist in society. Um, would you agree with me then that abolishing gender would be a good step forward as in a hypothetical?
Well, I think that I wouldn't really care if I lived in a world where there was no concept of gender. Hypothetically, we're speaking about a different planet or a different dimension in which Earth exists. But I think that a lot of people enjoy gender roles as well. I think more people enjoy them than don't. So I would take issue with destroying gender entirely just to appease a fraction of the population that wants it so. Having said that, I don't really care if I lived in a world like that either.
Are you saying then that if we could bring about a state of mind in most people where they would also not care at all whether or not gender was abolished, that you would be okay with the abolition of gender?
Yeah, I wouldn't care either which way. Because that's the other thing. That's the other thing is that taking a step back from YouTube and the online sphere and all of that, like gender is such a topic online, but like in real life, it's like I don't really give a shit, I guess. Like it's important for conversations when we're talking literally here on YouTube and in live streams, but in my day-to-day function, not really. Having said that, gender roles, I think a lot of people do appreciate them and thrive under them. So if we were to literally mandate that they could no longer exist, I think more people would be hurt than are hurting now
Yeah,
from not.
ideally, it would be like a slow social process by which we de incentivize the legitimacy and importance of gender. We kind of streamline things a bit. Right now, it's happening. Trans people are becoming more like socially accepted, non binary people will follow shortly thereafter.
That's wrong, actually.
Oh,
I've seen studies recently from a couple different sources. I've seen studies that the next generation is actually less tolerant of LGBT people than the previous.
I have seen those studies too, and I think I've seen contrary studies. Do you think it might have to do with the election of Donald J. Trump?
I think what it has to do with greatly, possibly, but I think another aspect of it is the way in which trans people are talked about in the media from the left and the right. I think that a lot of people feel that that meme of like LGBT shit being shoved down their throats leads to hostile feelings. I think adding a million letters and now numbers onto LGBT really confuses, upsets the general public.
No.
I think that that is sort of I think we've gotten a lot of backlash by how expansive and hostile sometimes that we get when advocating for our own rights. I
Well,
think
what
that
you're saying right now is like the left is, or the trans people are forcing bigots to be transphobic with their trans
no,
advocacy.
not at all, not at all, not at all. What I mentioned was the way in which trans people are often talked about in articles online. I think that just the real world, right or wrong, the real world consequence of a lot of the way in which LGBT shit is talked about in the media upsets people. I think, right or wrong, you know, maybe they're fucking idiots or wrong for getting upset and wanting to enact backlash against it, but that is the real world consequence of what's
Yeah,
happening.
that's typically how reactionary movements start. Usually, a socially maligned group starts to get acceptance, and then as they reach sort of like a peak, like a crescendo of social acceptance, there's this big backlash from reactionary groups, and we're seeing them right now in the form of people like Steven Crowder, who, in any other world, wouldn't give a fuck about.
When he tweets or says stupid LGBT shit.
I'm sorry?
Who I call out when he
No,
says
no. I know. And please believe me, if you hadn't expressed ire for Crowder, I would have mentioned it. Because fuck that guy. I really do consider him like a fascist, not even a proto-fascist. But that's what we're living through right now. We're living through the reactionary backlash of acceptance against groups. It's the exact same thing that happened after civil rights took place and blacks got their rights. There was a reformation of a bunch of Civil War era statues placed about the South, and lynchings for a time went up. So there always seems to be like the calm before the storm, this like bump that one has to get over. But I feel like in short order, probably in as little as 20 or 30 years, trans and non-binary people really are going to see about the same level of social acceptance as gay people do today, which is to say, not in the Republican Party, but everywhere else, more or less. So. And that's a future to look forward to, I suppose. We can all sort of get there. I'm hoping that by that process, gender will become less of a hot button issue, something people care less about, and we can move towards the glorious. Yes, I can. Oh, you were.
oh, I
not.
froze for a minute. I froze for a minute, but I did hear what you were saying. And I completely hope and pray to God that in 20, 30 years, there's an increased acceptance on that front. I really do. I just think that the way in which I go about trying to achieve that is different than a lot of other people. And it's just hard to convince me it's the wrong thing to do when I see firsthand that it works.
Can I only ask you, because, and by the way, I really do appreciate you speaking with me under any context. I imagine you're busy. You're about to go on a hike, so you're going to be busy soon. Can I only ask of you, while I recognize there is a legitimate difference in the lived experiences and thus the political advocacy of transsexual people like yourself and non-binary trans or whatever, I would only ask that when speaking of them, you maintain a distinction, which does not denote a lack of respectability. Like they're as legitimate as we are just two different people with different interests or something like that.
I think I've done that. I mean, maybe not always, but I think in the past year, 2 years, since transitioning myself and finding a lot of just inner peace, I think I've done that. I mean, things got heated between Jamie and myself on that Vice panel, but post Vice panel, anytime I've ever talked about them, I literally use they them pronouns, which like I genuinely try. And even on the Vice panel, I said, I don't have an issue with you identifying the way you identify. I just wish that we weren't viewed as the same thing because we are so different. That's my thing.
Out of curiosity, how long ago did that shoot take place? The Vice.
It was literally last week.
Oh, okay. So they released it like right after the. Oh, okay. I don't know for big publications if they hold on to that footage for months before releasing it.
No, it aired on TV the next day.
Gotcha. Okay. We've probably run through the topics, and you're definitely busy. I really appreciate you coming on to speak with me. Normally at this point, because I normally talk with like Nazis, and I try to get them to say trans rights, but that seems that seems like a low bar here, given our respective histories. So, can I get, please, for the chat, can I get a non-binary rights? And you can hit a dab while saying it if you would like to.
Okay. How do you dab?
Oh, okay. Wait, here. Can you see my camera? All right, hit it. We got to hit it. All right. Arms
Show me
out.
how and I'll do it.
Yeah, okay. Face into the crook of one elbow, other arm straight out. True, powerful.
Oh my God. Okay.
I'm ready.
I'm gonna cringe. People are gonna isolate this clip and just make a video about it.
This
Okay.
is extraordinary. This is life-changing for most people.
I'm gonna pee myself. Okay. Non-binary rights.
Yes. All right. Political praxis achieved.
Do not make that a GIF, people. Do not put that on YouTube beyond this video.
No gifting, okay? None of that. Be polite. All right. Synthesis achieved. This went substantially better than I ever could have hoped. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I really appreciate it, Blaire.
Yeah, it was good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Have a wonderful day. Have a great time with your hike. I assume. Wait, because I lived in LA. Are you hiking in like Griffith Mountain, or are you going to another place?
I'm hiking to the Hollywood sign, which I've never done, despite living here for 2 years. So,
Oh, fuck yeah! Hey, have a great time. I did that route once, and it was a lot of fun.
thank you. I'll have an amazing time, even though it's a million degrees out.
Have a good one.
See ya. It says we're still alive.
This is the first time I've used it. I'm trying to.
No. On the Google Hangout page, there should be a stop broadcast.
Oh, I see it.
Okay.
All
Bye,
right.
guys.